Welcome to the Healing for Male Survivors podcast. This is a podcast for male survivors of sexual abuse and assault, whether as a child or as an adult. Know that you are not alone and the abuse was not your fault. My name is Mike Chapman. I'm a certified recovery life coach and also a survivor. Let's find hope and healing together. This is part 2 of my interview with Hector Miray. In case you missed it, here's the intro from last time. If you've heard my story, you know that performing as a professional Santa Claus portrayal artist during the holidays is something that not only brings me joy, but has actually furthered my own healing process. What you may not know is that I also participate in cosplay at Comic-Con type conventions, appearing as a Santa/Jedi Knight mashup called Obi-Claus Kenobi. In this 2-part episode, I interview Hector Miray, who writes Faith Fandom devotionals and speaks at Comic-Con type conventions about this very topic. He not only leads panel discussions, but also often leads Geek Church on Sunday morning at many conventions, where he leads a full church service for convention attendees, many in full costume. I thought who else would be better to discuss my cosplay journey with. Though Hector is not a sexual abuse survivor, he has a lot of trauma in his own path and has found healing, in part, through his own journey into fandom. And now, part 2 of my interview with Hector Miray. How did you get to San Diego Comic-Con, and how did that go? How were you treated in that whole different environment? I'm assuming you didn't go this year. But when did you go, and how was that experience? Because that was huge.
I went in 2019, and it was San Diego's 50th anniversary. So
wow.
That was, a wonderful time to go. And
pre-COVID, so yeah.
It was their last show pre-COVID. And honestly, that's 100% all God, not me situation. Because like you said, it is the pinnacle. And I had thoughts maybe one day I can get there or, be a part of it. And there's an organization that's at San Diego. That's the Christian Comic Art Society.
Oh, wow.
They have been hosting a church service at San Diego for over 40 years.
Wow.
Or maybe not that they've hosted it, but there's been a church service at San Diego for 40 years.
Wow.
They were in charge of putting together the church service. They also do panels like mine, like the Faith and Fandom discussion panel. They have something like that, and where they bring in all faiths with that. They have a big network with it. And even without ever communicating, we were basically doing a lot of similar things. And I didn't know that they were there doing the things they were doing. But there was a group of folks that are part of that organization that read my books, that used them for small group material. So they reached out to me to ask me if I would be interested in coming to San Diego. And I said, sure, absolutely. And then crickets. They may have asked me in January, and I didn't hear anything back. And, I didn't want to chase that and get disappointed or whatever. And then like 2 weeks before the show, they're like, all right, let's talk flights. I'm like, what? Flights for what? And they're like, we're bringing you to San Diego. And I'm like, oh, literally like a 6-month bubble between.
Wow.
And so I just was not planning on it. And part of the thing with my church's agreement with me, like it's not like a contract per se or whatever, because I was doing Faith and Fandom before I got hired at this church. And they're like, we know this is an important ministry, and so they give me 5 Sundays off a year just to do Faith and Fandom stuff. Wow. And I'd already cashed in my 5.
Wow.
GalaxyCon 2019 was my 5th that I already planned for, and I used it the week before. So, I was overtime with it and everything else. They're like, just go ahead. But it was the Christian Comic Art Society that really kind of put my foot in the door with that. And they flew me out there, put me up with a family that's part of their with one of the ministries. It's Geeky Guys and Gals for God. It's a mouthful, but they're a great ministry that's out there. They were the ones that were doing the small group.
Geeky Guys and Gals for God. Yeah.
Okay. And the number 4. So it's like GGG 4G. And like they do an outreach where they give out like 1,000 bottles of water at San Diego on Saturday at the hottest hour. And they run the panels and stuff like that. But they had brought me out there, and they had some of my books at their booth, but they brought me out to do kind of a mixer hangout discussion time, to do the spiritual themes and comics panel, and also to be part of the church service on Sunday. It was great to be there. It's overwhelming.
Right. How many were in attendance? I know Galaxy News and Observer said over 50,000.
Okay, because like the year before or whatever was like 30 some. So yeah, they've definitely San Diego's 180,000.
Wow. That's mind blowing because yeah.
So yeah, and that's the thing.
And it's several hotels and conference center. You've got a convention center, and then it's several different things happen on adjacent hotels. That happened a little bit here in Raleigh with GalaxyCon, where some spilled over to the Marriott.
Well, there's some stuff that spills over to the streets, but literally, dude, almost everything's in one building.
Wow. Oh, wow. Okay.
And so on the show floor, the expo floor, like it's on several layers in the convention center.
Right.
If you took GalaxyCon Raleigh, the show floor, 6 of the show floors in a row.
Wow.
It's to the point that when you get off the escalator or the stairs, elevator, whatever, and you look down, you can't see where it ends.
Wow.
And like there was a fully functional Krusty Krab built in the middle of the show floor. DC had a booth that year that was 3 stories. So you would literally walk up ramps to the different DC creators. They built a small Arkham Asylum where you could walk through and get on the phone with Arkham inmates.
Wow.
And I mean, it's just, there was just so much. If you're prepared for the amount of crowd and the amount of everything, it's wonderful. I don't know that I enjoy it on that level, even on a pre-COVID situation of just that much, because I've not attended a GalaxyCon ever in terms of, because I was a vendor before they started. Like when they were still SuperCon, I was vending from that point on.
Dude in a booth.
I'm a dude in a booth. I get in to my table before all the crowds. I don't wait in lines. I don't have to stand in line for the other people and stuff like that. And then I could just like scurry out. So I like my little security blanket.
Right. And you got this table in front of you and you're behind your booth. And yeah. So
I tell my congregation, like when we're talking about sharing the gospel or doing evangelism or outreach or just even having conversations with people, I was like, look, I can talk about this all day, but it's easy for me. I've got a microphone and you chose to come here. It's easy for me to talk a big game behind a microphone or on a stage or even at a con when I'm behind a booth. It's still a platform. It's still a little safety net. I feel like if I'm not with people specifically with me, I get kind of anxious and nervous in a crowd. If I've got somebody with me, I'm fine. But I usually find myself alone in those situations. And so San Diego, like the organization that was running it, that brought me out there, they told me where to be and what time to be there, but they all had other responsibilities. They were in cosplay contests or panels of themselves and stuff like that. So, just getting dropped off about a mile from the place because you couldn't get any closer.
Right.
And walking up and trying to find my way in, getting in the lines. And then once you get there, and like also it's California, so that's a whole another thing.
Right.
And it's just like you may have seen outside of GalaxyCon, there's the one that's an Anchorage Street Preacher guy.
Right. Yep.
They roll about 100 deep.
Wow.
At San Diego that you have to go up through. So they're like arm in arm locked in the middle of the street, like literally trying to protest and stop people from going. That's its own experience. Like literally one of the first things I saw before I even got there was that there was a booth inside San Diego selling I Survived the Angry Street Preachers merchandise. So you can buy hats and stickers and shirts. I enjoyed it. It was a cool experience. I'm glad I got to share the gospel in the way that I did. On the panel that I was at for Sunday morning, it was me, the guy who makes the Action Bible, and the guy who makes the Samson graphic novel and works for like Rooted Chronicles and stuff. And I was on a booth with like people that were above my pay grade in a lot of ways. And my friend Mario De Matteo that makes a graphic novel of Paul, but like a Star Wars version, sort of. They're just people that are doing really good things. And they're like, looking at even who the guests were this year, I was like, they're people that I've ran in circles with. And I did love it. I absolutely. And getting, so I screen wrote for a number of years for Clever Movies, Screen Junkies and stuff, just writing stuff for them. And one of my perks every year was that one of the ladies that I wrote for always was a red carpet person at San Diego. And
Hmm.
she would always send me one of the San Diego bags. Cause, if you
Oh,
go, you
right,
get the giant bags. They say San Diego, they all have
right.
designs. And so every year I look forward to getting the bag from my friend who was going to be working in San Diego. Then to actually be handed my bag, that was amazing. San Diego was also the first time I got a badge that labeled me as a professional.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
So like my San Diego badge up here in the shadow box, literally just has my name and just says professional. And I was like, and I get that that's, I'm professional because they brought me in from that one organization. But at the same time, like I loved the experience, but I don't love the experience of a show that big. I just realizing it's not for me as much, like the large crowds, because I don't know. I've get insecure in my old age of
right.
being in that kind of that. But
Now, are
even
you deep down? Are you an introvert or an extrovert?
I'm an introvert by myself. I'm an introvert.
But you function as an extrovert, but
Yeah,
inside, yeah, the whole, I love the explanation. How you recharge your batteries. Do
yeah.
you isolate or do you have to be around people? Because I'm an introvert and I definitely, when I need to recharge, it's like, no, I need to go into my little shell and hide and to recharge. But then once I'm recharged, okay, I can be out and be boisterous and be around people. And so
I'm
many
an
people in the ministry are introverts, but they function very externally and with
well,
people and so forth.
I say that I'm an extrovert with a platform. I'm an introvert as a person,
Yeah,
and that's where I've really come to grips with that. And
I understand that. And even this year with the crowds, yeah, I knew Saturday night, that's when they had the big cosplay contest, and it goes later in the evening, that where it's most of the main things until they go into the quote unquote adult things, burlesque and so forth, that I definitely stay away from. But everything dies down around 8:30 most nights. But that starts at 8:30, and it's like, okay, I need a little break to stay on. So I went back to my hotel room like around 6 and just let me go back into my little cocoon and refresh, and before I have to come back out and be this character. Because yeah, I'm on as Santa. So yeah, like I said before, I'm Obi-Claus Kenobi. When I started it, I talked to the Claus community, big network of Santa Claus portrayal artists across the country, and said, okay, I'm thinking about doing this cosplay thing. What do y'all think? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Tons of encouragement. One guy, very biblical, it's like, you shouldn't be dressing up. It's like, dude, you're Santa Claus. So why are you against this? And everyone was like, say the same thing. It's like, dude, you're Santa. So why are you against someone dressing up? So anyway, but the one guy said, don't be Mike doing this Santa mashup. Be Santa Claus doing cosplay. And that made all the difference. So then I'm on as Santa and I'm doing cosplay. So yeah, and to be on, especially in season during December, yeah, I'm on so much. Yeah, you're on. So any child, especially for children, you're on. You are Santa, doing cosplay. So very unique role. So yeah, I'm very much on. So to stay on, it's like, okay, I need to recharge my batteries for a little bit. So I did that Saturday night before the cosplay, but knowing that it's a huge number of people and it can be overwhelming, but know your limits, do self-care and all that. So,
I will say that if
uh-huh.
I ever did San Diego again or anything else, I would have to have someone with me. And I think that would balance me out because
Right.
I'm not just a recharge my batteries by being alone. I need to be like just with a person
Right.
or a couple people that I actually feel safe and cared about with. That recharges me. So
Oh yeah. Yeah, that makes sense as well. And I've, other than that first con where I went with my buddy, though we barely got through the front door and then we went different ways. Yeah, I've gone by myself each year. The two Greenville events, one's this coming weekend. They're just day long events. I just go by myself. Trying to get my kids to go, and they're in their 20s and different scheduling conflicts and so forth, trying to get them to come. So yeah, that would be nice. So I haven't experienced that with a friend to go.
one one
And
of one of the best things for me in the fact that one of probably the only reasons Faith and Fandom still went as long as it went so far is that because I started doing this when I was doing college ministry, one of the young artists from the university I did college ministry with was graduating right when this started. And so I asked him, I was like, look, will you do these? He knew what I did. I was like, well, you do these events with me. You just come as an artist, sell prints, and you can make them memes of like what we do with Faith and Fandom, like, but do big quality prints, just do sketches. Literally taking a friend to go with me on these things kept me going for years.
Oh, excellent.
Because I knew I had, if somebody was mean to me, like as they were walking by, I had someone kind to me beside me and it helped buffer. Right. And so it is much harder, I feel like, to do that. I also, with my kids, if I take one of my kids with me, I'm gold, because it's hard for a stranger to really make me feel demoralized when I've got one of my small humans with me.
Right. Right.
But
really like a little buffer. It's like, oh, okay. All right.
Yep.
Yeah.
As my 15-year-old say, that'll buff. And I don't even know what that means, but that's their phrase now. Having that blanket really helps me do ministry better, but also helps me be more secure as a person.
Right.
So there's times where I'm just like finding people that have the time, that have the ability, that also have the social battery and everything else to be able to do that is a harder situation sometimes.
Right. Let's see. I know. Huge topic. I might just have you back. I'm thinking of, there's a guy who writes stories on basically recovery devotionals, but using superheroes as his theme. So I'm going to have him on, interview him, and I'm thinking about having the two of you back on a panel and talk about the concepts of trauma in some of these stories, some of these geekdom stories.
Have you heard of Dean Tripp or Something Terrible?
No, not at all.
Put this on your radar, your list for later. There's a guy named Dean Tripp, Trippe. About the time I was getting started, he did a piece of art called You'll Be Safe Here. And it's got Batman walking into the TARDIS, like the doctor's TARDIS.
Right.
With a little kid with his hand on his shoulder, and literally every hero you can imagine, thousands of heroes are just collectively sitting around the TARDIS to protect this one little kid. It was a piece of art that he advertised from some of my first shows. I bought that print my first con ever. And it was part of a Kickstarter for a book called Something Terrible. And it literally is a book of a guy who recovers from abuse through superheroes. I'll send you some information on it, but it's just I was like, that sounds like something that would be beneficial with you.
Thank you. Okay. So yeah, I'll have him on too. Something else I wanted to ask you. You mentioned your father's family is from Puerto Rico. What about your mom's family? Is she Hispanic as well?
No, my mom is as Southern white as you can get, like Crisco biscuit level.
Okay. Yeah. So you grew up with that side of your family. How have you tried to embrace your Puerto Rican heritage in your faith, in your ministry? And because that is part of who you are. So how have you been able to embrace that in your ministry?
In my ministry, it's helped embrace them in some ways, because there's some cons or organizations that will use me as their diversity card. I'm like, bro, if I'm your diversity card, you're not swinging hard enough. Because like my partner that did art with me forever, was a young African American man. We were at our booth one year, and the gentleman who runs Blurred Con came by our booth.
What is Blurred Con?
Blurred, the term blurred is black nerd.
Oh, BLERD. Okay,
yep.
Yes, I've heard the term. Yes,
okay.
Blurred.
So Blurred Con is a con that's in DC that is a black nerd con. That guy came by the booth, and he invited my partner to come set up our booth at that show. And he looked at me and said, "You're brown enough." And like, with that, and I was like, I appreciate that. But, it's been a weird ride with my family's Hispanic side as well. One, I don't speak Spanish. I tried in high school, but that was the thing too. Like when I was little, apparently like my dad didn't shipped off until I was 5 or 6. So apparently I spoke Spanish until like kindergarten.
Wow.
But once he was gone, so was that. There's always,
when you hear it, do you understand any of it?
Moderately, like I get the gist, but like if it's going full tilt, no.
Right.
So with the Hispanic side of my family, because my dad was basically in a either bedbound or in a vegetative state for close to 13 years.
Right.
My grandmother spent in the majority of that time as a caregiver or checking in on him or making sure that he had his needs met and everything like that. When my dad passed in, let's say, 2009 or 10, my mom and dad passed in like a 2-year window. So when my dad passed, my whole Puerto Rican family moved here. I had a 15-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 10-year-old. My aunt, who is my closest relative on my Puerto Rican side in terms of age, has a 15-year-old and a 14-year-old. So she moved literally the house across the street from me so that we could help raise our kids together.
Right.
But then she didn't enjoy living here. And she also didn't enjoy my parenting. She moved like an hour from here. So it's weird because like for about 5 or 6 years, I had all of my Puerto Rican culture. You know, we did Sunday dinners, stuff like that. And I have failed at that part of my community because it felt like a little bit of my grandmother is still travels a lot. She's in her 80s, but she'll come here for the summer months and then go back to Puerto Rico for the winter months. I don't know. It's just been kind of like I feel like I don't belong to this culture or that culture in terms, at least with my family.
Kind of in between two worlds. Yeah.
Yeah. Because my mom's side of the family, honestly, once my mom passed, they cut all ties with me.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. Outside of like my uncle, who's my accountant, like I haven't heard from my mom's side of my family or they've been really involved with that. And like, so it's just
growing up, did you feel like you were an other because of your Hispanic background?
Absolutely.
Wow.
Because I had like a school bus load of cousins, but there were only 2 cousins out of like 30 that weren't 100% Caucasian. It was myself and one of my other cousins who was half Filipino.
Oh, wow.
And basically the 2 of us were always like segmented. Feel like I only hear from that side of the family if someone dies or if someone's in the hospital or if someone needs a wedding.
Right.
And so it's just like,
because you're pastor. Hey, free. Yeah.
For free stuff.
Yeah.
So it's like, I felt, especially once my mom was gone, I felt like completely isolated with that. And so I really was depending on my Hispanic side of the family to be family. And, you know, it hasn't turned out that way. So that's like, I think it's one of the reasons why I lean so heavily just on time with my kids and building that up. It's because I want that to be better. We didn't click the way that I think they thought we would, and just different styles with everything. And I respect that, but it still feels, I know personally I struggle with abandonment issues, and it puts me on the defensive with things because I feel abandonment issues with that. It's hard for me to invest more when I feel like I'm not welcome. And I know that's growth I have to deal with in my own self, and I can't live in that headspace, but I also need to figure out how to take those steps appropriately. Like the kids are having a sleepover this weekend, but like building a good relationship with the rest of that side of the family is a little more difficult.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. Now, moving back to, I see, I know we're on audio, we're not on video, but we're on Zoom. So yeah, I see your wall of geekdom stuff, actually 2 walls.
Yeah.
Your geekdom
I got a corner. Yeah.
Yes, and I see tons of Batmen, lots of other characters. You started out with Serenity and Firefly. What are you currently into, and what's your favorite space of within fandom? What's your favorites?
I am a big Batman fan, and I think that's been Batman the Animated Series on. Off of that, there's a character called Red Hood that is my favorite of that. So
that's a Robin variant.
He's the black sheep of the Robin family. He was the second Robin, and in like 1989, they actually did a 900 number poll, and they put it in comics. If this many people call this number, Jason lives. If this many people call this number, Jason dies.
Wow.
Jim Starlin was the guy who was doing it at that point, I believe. It boiled down to like 60 votes.
Wow.
Over to kill him.
Oh.
And so the collective comic book universe voted to kill Jason Todd, which was the second Robin, after Dick Grayson had become Nightwing. He stayed dead from 1989 until 2003.
Right. It's like soap operas. It's like no one ever stays dead. You can always bring them back.
Well, and that's the thing, like Winter Soldier, Bucky, they came back at the same time because one of the longest running jokes in comics was nobody stays dead in comics except Bucky, because Bucky was a similar thing. He was killed off way earlier But and they actually kind of credit Jason Todd for the creation of Bucky, because when they brought Jason Todd back, they're like, oh, we can bring Bucky back. It's very much the Winter Soldier Jason. He's that paradigm. He's the black sheep, the one who's not good enough, the one who doesn't fit. And I was like, also one of the questions things. He's one of my favorites with that, but he came back a little more brutal than he started.
Sounds like with your own story, you can relate to that, being the black sheep.
Yeah.
Not fitting in and being with your lily white Southern biscuit family. And you're the little brown kid who doesn't quite fit that mold.
And that's the thing, whether it's, down to ethnicity or down to like culture, down to, the things, like I feel like I fit in more with that. And I think that's probably why I connect with it. It's also the first story I read getting back into comics. I read comics as a kid up until like 1993 or 4. They did this Spider-Man clone saga thing that was one of those that you had to buy 40 issues across a bunch of different books, and then it was terrible. And I gave up reading comics, and I was just like, I can't afford this, and I don't have time for this.
See, what you do is they still have a few bookstores around, but I know I went back into comics when Civil War came out. This is back when I was doing interpreting gigs. I go place to place, tons of downtime between jobs, and there was this Books A Million store, and I would just go, and they had comfortable chairs, and you could just get the stuff, read it, and put it back. And you wouldn't have to buy anything. And there was so much Civil War was everywhere in the Marvelverse. So I'm reading all these comics about this whole Civil War thing. Yeah, I really got back into comics. Didn't buy any of them, but it was a great way to do that. Yeah.
Similarly, because I was working at Walden Books, same thing. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, and it might make you sad. It's the policy for bookstores, which is probably one of the reasons why they're, in struggle mode. That every magazine, comic book, and paperback gets thrown away.
Wow.
Because if it's not selling or they don't want it in the store, it is cheaper to reprint the book than to ship the book. And so what a bookseller's job to do, usually when people aren't watching, is to take every magazine, every comic book, and whatever paperbacks are recalled, rip the covers off, throw the book away, and mail the covers back to the publisher in one envelope.
Wow.
So part of my job every day when I was a bookseller was ripping the covers off of comic books. There was one day I was ripping covers off, and there was this comic book called Hush. And that should have been, let's say, Batman 610, I think might have been what it was. It was the 3rd issue in the Hush story arc. So I hadn't read comic books in 10 years. That was the story. As I was reading it, I was like, man, this artwork is stunning. It was Jim Lee art throughout the whole book. It was written by Jeff Loeb, who did a lot of some of the best Marvel stuff. He's still an executive producer for Marvel now for comics. I just picked it up, was like, man, this is pretty. And I sat down and read that issue. And then when the next issue came out, I bought the next one. But that storyline is actually a storyline where Jason Todd gets brought back from the dead. But it's like kind of a, is he back? Is he not back thing? Because there's someone who desecrates his grave. And it looks like they're pretending to be him, but not him. And so it's like, man, I was like, oh man, I love all this. And, I was literally following the character of Red Hood since it existed. Like I just managed to pick it up at the right time. So there's also a nice connecting piece, the fact that I haven't missed anything like that I can follow along with that. So that's always been a character I've really connected with. Same with Doctor Who. Is like, Doctor Who, I just think is one of the best storytelling mediums for emotional depth, depending on the actor. Because like David Tennant is good at rage. Matt Smith, who is the doctor after him, was good at like heartbreak and joy. And then Peter Capaldi's character was the 12th Doctor. I really just think is the best at anguish and just dealing with pain and trauma. And it's just like, they just do such a great job. And my youngest daughter is actually named after a Doctor Who character.
Oh, excellent.
Now it's time for 4 questions, that part of the podcast when we get to know our guest a bit better by asking a few questions. Let's go.
We'd like to end each podcast episode with the 4 questions. I've got the 4 questions. So, Hector, first question, what is your favorite food memory?
I'd say currently my favorite food memory is there's this, you know what flan is? Like the
yes. Oh, yes.
Okay. So there's a flan cheesecake
Ooh.
It's one of those, it's the savory, sweet, caramelly thing. I don't like flan, but I like the flan cheesecake. And it was something my grandmother makes. My family's kind of adopted making it, and it's not something we have often. But like, I just currently, if you ask me that, my favorite food memory is just that flavor, just tasting that, because it feels like one of those times when everything was still together a little bit better. Everything was a little bit more, unified. So I think that's probably my favorite food memory, is just that flavor and knowing, our family was together and a little bit more closer together in that.
Right. Yeah. It's amazing how tied in food memories can be, and they're so tied into emotion as
Absolutely.
well. Usually, yeah, about family, friends, all of that is tied in together. So I love asking that question because it makes you think, yeah, what is it? Why is it my favorite? Oh, it's usually tied to family and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
What is your favorite Christmas or holiday memory?
Favorite Christmas memory is being 9 or 10, getting a Walkman with MC Hammer's Please Hammer Don't Hurt 'Em album on cassette, and just
You're aging
me.
yourself.
Absolutely. And just, I remember like being a Christmas person. Don't hate me. I've never actually watched It's a Wonderful Life.
Horrors. That's like my favorite movie of all time for
That
Christmas.
I've never
And
actually watched it, but there's always been clips of it on so many times, and there's been so many
right,
parodies and everything else. I'm just like, I got the story.
right.
I haven't just sat down and watched it, but I just remember like the way the Christmas lights looked in my living room when I was a kid. That night specifically, like It's a Wonderful Life was on in the background. I'm just headphones on, blaring low quality 90s cassette audio of MC Hammer and dancing around in my living room to the point that I'm like waking my parents up because I stayed up all night just listening to that same tape on repeat. And
Wow.
I think that was my favorite kid innocence. Everything is still good memory. So
Right. Excellent. I love that. What is your favorite church memory, either as a child or as an adult?
and I think I've thought about that, and that's changed every time I've thought about it. I don't think it's any of from my child age. In pastoral ministry, there's just been a lot of good church memories. I'm just gonna make a cop out and go with like the most recent ish, or close to most recent ish, is we did Geek Church at GalaxyCon, and the guy asked, when I came to Q&A time at the end, and the guy just asked if he could have a hug. And
Oh,
I was like, okay, I feel like I'm in the right place for
yeah.
that. And
That was an awesome moment.
it
Yes.
was, and it's just like, and one of the things that I didn't notice when it happened is like I didn't hear any response from the crowd, because I was like hugging the guy like in that capacity. Then I went back and edited the audio from the church service and heard everybody like go awe and clap, and I'm like, I missed all that.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. You were
and
in the moment,
I was
focusing on the hug. And yeah, we were like, what a precious moment. And it's something, yeah, we, all of us kind of need a hug sometimes. And the fact that he stood up and asked for it, yeah, that was really special.
yeah, and so I'd say just because that's fresh, and then I'd say that's probably it right now.
Oh, that's great. And I was there for that.
You were
That's
there for that.
excellent. Yes. Now, what is your favorite scripture and what about it speaks to you? Whether one verse, I know mine's a couple of verses. So a section. Or,
I think my pretty standard one is Colossians 3:23, which is whatever you do with your whole heart for God, not for man. I think that's kind of been my driving force for self-motivation, for pushing myself forward, for doing jobs and tasks that I didn't enjoy, or just different seasons in my life. Is like, if I can give my effort in this moment like I'm doing it for God instead of people, it will change the outcome of how I move forward with it. And so that's kind of like my inner dialogue with everything, I think, is, am I doing this for me? Am I doing this for other people? Or am I doing this for God? All right, keep going.
right, right. Yeah, that makes sense. Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much. And I think we're winding up. Where can we find you online and with your books? And I know you have a website and so forth. What's the best way for us to find you?
Faith and Fandom on any social media, like at Faith and Fandom, spelled out all lowercase, will be on Instagram and Twitter.
With A and D or an ampersand?
A and D.
Okay.
just for the address for those. On Facebook, it's facebook.com/faithandfandom spelled out. And my website is faithandfandom.org. And that's basically just a landing place to send you other places, but it also, the blog section of that houses about 170 geeky devotionals that you can read for free.
Right.
And
a lot of them the same content that's in your books as well.
It's all the stuff that's in the first 8 books,
Wow.
and some stuff that's going in the 9th book as well. The only things that aren't in there are like the not geeky devotionals. The one that we just put out, the bite-sized one, honestly, just because I didn't want to have to make 101 chapters or 101 different blog posts to do it. You can find almost everything that's written there. And then also you can link to our podcast from there, but also faithandfandom.podbean.com is our podcast channel. You can type Faith and Fandom wherever you get podcasts and pull it up. But that link you'll be able to dig a bit deeper on our podcast there. And our podcast usually has a review of cons, audio chapters of books, and I do a 3-minute radio devotional for Love Thy Nerd Radio, and there's all of those end up on there as well.
Yes, well, I saw that on Facebook. What is Love Thy Nerd?
So Love Thy Nerd is a collective organization that is basically the kind of heart behind what I do, but like as a whole organization. They have a content network where they have people that do different writings or, essays and stuff. They have a whole radio station that is just well curated Christian music, but also will put podcasts on their radio station. So there's people that play board games and do podcasts about that. I do a comics review podcast with another pastor for them, and they're going to start broadcasting whenever I do interviews, they're going to broadcast it on their network first before it goes to my channel. And they've just been, an organization I supported as they started, but that's just their thing is loving their nerdy neighbors is the way they do it. And they actually just sent 22 missionaries to Gen Con, which is a big con that just happened. They went as missionaries, and basically what they did was they ran like Funko's booth. And when people are doing board game tutorials or stuff like that, they were the ones sitting down and teaching you how to play board games and helping people do stuff like that. So they do a lot of content creation. They're just a fun network to work with.
Great. Excellent. Okay. Thank you so much for coming. Plan on having you back soon, where I want to talk more about different aspects in fandom, in geekdom, related specifically to childhood trauma. There's so many different stories out there. And I definitely want to pick your brain as to what stories you have found out there that have been inspiring for your own healing journey, and that for those of us who deal with childhood trauma, that might find kinship too. So I'm going to have you back on so we can discuss that. I'm going to have you back on soon. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for being here.
You're very welcome.
If you would like to learn more about my coaching with Polar Live Consulting, where I provide one-on-one coaching and group coaching, both with a focus on healing for male survivors, reach out to me at polarliveconsulting.com. That is Polar spelled Polar. I would love to hear from you. I want to hear your story. If you would like your story featured on this podcast, contact me via my website. If you like this podcast, please rate and review, because that's how other people can find me, and I really want to spread this message of healing and hope to others. And remember, you are not alone. Healing is possible, and the abuse was not your fault. Let me repeat that. The abuse was not your fault. See you next time on the Healing for Male Survivors podcast.